My name is Ainsley and I'm 27 years old. The sound of my apartment door creaking open at 2 in the morning should have terrified me, but by then, I was used to it. There they were again, my parents, hunched over my kitchen table with my bank statements spread out like evidence in a crime scene. This was the 5th time in 2 months. When I confronted them, they just smiled and said they were checking on me. That was the night I decided to disappear from their lives completely. Before we dive into how I orchestrated my escape and watched my parents face the consequences of their actions, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with family members who don't respect boundaries, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about parental love. Let's begin this wild journey together. Growing up in my parents' house felt like living in a maximum security prison disguised as a suburban home. Every diary entry was read, every phone call monitored, every friend scrutinized, and usually rejected. They called it love, but even as a child, I knew love wasn't supposed to feel like suffocation. When I turned 18 and left for college, I thought I was finally free. How naive I was to think physical distance would break their psychological hold on me. They insisted on having a spare key to my first apartment, claiming it was for emergencies only. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it would keep the peace and they'd never actually use it. The first incident happened 3 months after I moved in. I came home from work to find my mother elbow deep in my closet, sorting through my clothes with the efficiency of a military inspector. She had garbage bags filled with what she deemed inappropriate attire, including perfectly professional work dresses that showed my knees and sleeveless blouses she called provocative. When I protested, she cried and said she was only trying to help me maintain a respectable image. My father backed her up, saying I should be grateful to have parents who cared so much. The second break-in was more subtle but infinitely more violating. I noticed my laptop running slowly and discovered my father had installed comprehensive tracking software while I was at work. Every website visited, every email sent, every document created was being monitored and reported back to them. When I confronted him with the evidence, he didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he lectured me about the dangers of the internet and how young women needed protection from online predators. I was 25 years old with a marketing degree and a steady job, but to him, I was still a helpless child who couldn't be trusted with her own digital life. The third violation took social invasion to new heights. I came home on a Wednesday evening to find my living room transformed into a makeshift church. My parents had invited their entire prayer group, about 15 people, into my apartment without asking. They were deep in prayer for my soul, apparently concerned about my spiritual welfare since I'd stopped attending their church. The group members looked at me with pitying eyes as my mother explained they were performing an intervention for my eternal salvation. My neighbors later told me this wasn't the first time. They'd been hosting these gatherings weekly while I was at work. But nothing prepared me for the fourth break-in, the one that shattered any remaining illusion of privacy. I'd been feeling watched for weeks, an eerie sensation I couldn't shake. My instincts proved correct when I discovered tiny cameras hidden throughout my apartment. One in my bedroom smoke detector, another disguised as an air freshener in my bathroom, and a third tucked behind books on my living room shelf. The confrontation that followed was explosive. They didn't apologize or show remorse. Instead, they accused me of being paranoid and ungrateful. My mother sobbed that they only wanted to ensure I was living a moral life, while my father insisted I must be hiding something if I objected to their supervision. I changed the locks immediately, but even that proved futile. 2 weeks later, they were back inside. They'd convinced a locksmith they were responding to a medical emergency, claiming I was diabetic and hadn't answered my phone in days. Of course, I'm not diabetic, and I'd spoken to them that very morning. The locksmith, believing he was potentially saving a life, let them in without question. This time, I found them going through my medicine cabinet, photographing prescription bottles, and discussing whether my anxiety medication was a sign of deeper psychological issues they needed to address. The building manager, Vernon, was supposed to be my ally in this battle for privacy. A man in his 60s with grown children of his own. I thought he'd understand my situation. What I didn't know was that Vernon and my father went way back, having served in the same military unit decades ago. That bond of brotherhood apparently trumped any professional obligation. He had to protect his tenants' privacy. Despite my explicit instructions that my parents were not to be given access under any circumstances, Vernon would smile and nod, then hand them a master key the moment I left for work. My requests fell on deaf ears, and my complaints to the building's corporate office mysteriously never received responses. I later learned Vernon had been intercepting them, another favor to his old friend. The invasion of my personal space was just the beginning. My parents, emboldened by their unlimited access to my apartment and Vernon's complicity, decided to expand their surveillance into every aspect of my life. Their next target was my workplace, a mid-sized marketing firm where I'd worked hard to establish myself as a reliable and creative professional. The day they showed up unannounced at my office was the beginning of my professional downfall. They arrived during a crucial client presentation, bursting past reception with the determination of people on a mission. My boss Denise, a woman I'd always respected for her professionalism, was pulled aside by my parents for what they called an urgent family matter. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched in horror as they engaged in an animated conversation with her, their hands gesturing wildly, their faces masks of concern. When I finally extricated myself from the presentation, the damage was done. Denise looked at me differently, a mixture of pity and caution in her eyes. She later told me my parents had expressed grave concerns about my mental stability, suggesting I might be suffering from delusions and paranoia. My coworker Garrett, who'd become a good friend over our 2 years working together, pulled me aside the next week with disturbing news. My mother had been making rounds through the office, having lunch with different team members, skillfully extracting information about my personal life. She was particularly interested in my dating history, any after-work socializing, and whether anyone had noticed concerning behavior. Garrett said she presented herself as a loving mother worried about her daughter's well-being, but he found her questions invasive and manipulative. Not everyone shared his skepticism, though. Several colleagues began treating me with kid gloves, whispering when I walked by, their eyes full of unwarranted concern. The parental invasion spread through my apartment building like a virus. They systematically befriended every one of my neighbors, presenting themselves as devoted parents trying to stay connected with their busy daughter. Mrs. Chun from across the hall started reporting my comings and goings to them, believing she was helping facilitate family bonding. The young couple downstairs mentioned that my parents had asked them to text if they ever heard concerning noises, or if I brought anyone home. Even the mail carrier had been recruited, with my father slipping him $20 bills to mention if I received packages from certain retailers or any official-looking correspondence. The mail situation escalated when I discovered concrete evidence of mail tampering. I'd been missing several important documents, including bank statements and a job offer from a competing firm. During a reluctant Sunday dinner at their house, I found these documents in my father's home office, neatly filed in a folder labeled with my name. When confronted, they showed no shame. My mother actually lectured me about financial responsibility while waiving my credit card statements, pointing out purchases she deemed frivolous. The job offer, which would have included a significant raise and relocation to another state, had been hidden because they couldn't bear the thought of me moving farther away. Their smear campaign within our extended family reached new heights of manipulation. During a family reunion I couldn't attend due to work commitments, they held what amounted to an intervention without me present. Armed with carefully curated evidence, they painted a picture of a daughter spiraling out of control. They showed photos taken from the hidden cameras, highlighting any moment that could be misconstrued. A glass of wine became evidence of alcoholism. Over-the-counter sleep aids became drug abuse. A male friend helping me move furniture became proof of promiscuity. My Aunt Ruth called me in tears, begging me to get help for my supposed addictions. When I tried to explain the truth, she accused me of being in denial, saying my parents' evidence was overwhelming. The professional consequences of their meddling became undeniable when I was passed over for a promotion I'd worked towards for 2 years. Denise, in a moment of uncomfortable honesty, admitted that leadership had concerns about my stability and whether I could handle increased responsibility. The whisper campaign my parents had started had taken root, growing into a thorny hedge that blocked my career advancement. My annual review, previously glowing, now included notes about potential personal issues affecting my work performance. I'd never missed a deadline or made a significant error, but the seed of doubt my parents had planted was bearing poisonous fruit. My relationship with Brandon, which had been progressing beautifully for 8 months, crumbled under the weight of my parents' interference. They'd contacted him directly, first through seemingly innocent friend requests on social media, then through increasingly alarming private messages. They told him about my supposed mental health issues, warned him about my family's history of instability, which was entirely fabricated, and suggested he could do better than someone with so many problems. The final straw came when they showed up at his apartment unannounced, armed with their folder of evidence. Brandon, overwhelmed and confused, couldn't reconcile the woman he knew with the person they described. He ended things via text, saying he needed to focus on his own well-being. Even my attempts at professional help weren't safe from their reach. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, to process the trauma of their constant violations. Somehow, they discovered where and when my appointments were held. They showed up at her office, demanding to be included in what they called family therapy. When Dr. Martinez refused, citing patient confidentiality, they accused her of hiding something sinister and threatened to report her to the medical board. She had to have security escort them out and eventually suggested I find another therapist, as their harassment was affecting her other patients. The safe space I'd created to heal from their abuse had been poisoned by their presence. After losing my promotion, my boyfriend, and even my therapist to my parents' relentless invasion, I decided to take control of the narrative. If they wanted to spy on me, I would spy right back. I invested in high-quality hidden cameras of my own, positioning them strategically throughout my apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using their own tactics against them, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I needed concrete evidence of their violations, something undeniable that could protect me legally and socially from their gaslighting. The first night of recording yielded nothing, but on the second night, the cameras captured everything. At 3 a.m, my apartment door opened silently, and in walked my parents with Vernon. They moved through my space with practiced ease, suggesting this nighttime invasion was routine. My mother went straight for my laptop while my father began a systematic search of my living room. Vernon stood by the door like a lookout, occasionally checking his phone and the hallway. The casualness of their invasion made my skin crawl. They weren't sneaking or hurrying. They were comfortable, familiar with every corner of my home. What I witnessed next broke something inside me. My mother had found my journal, the one place I still felt safe expressing my true thoughts and feelings. She sat on my couch and began reading aloud to my father, her voice dripping with mockery. She imitated my writing style, exaggerating emotional passages for effect, while my father chuckled and made dismissive comments. Years of private thoughts, dreams, fears, and experiences were reduced to entertainment for their amusement. She photographed pages that particularly interested her, probably to share with her prayer group or use as ammunition in future arguments. My father's search had a specific focus that chilled me. He wasn't randomly snooping. He was hunting for what he called evidence of sin. He methodically went through my bedroom drawers, examining every piece of clothing, every personal item, with the intensity of a detective at a crime scene. When he found a box of condoms in my nightstand, he held them up like a trophy, shaking his head in disgust while muttering about promiscuity and damnation. He photographed the box from multiple angles, ensuring the brand and quantity were clearly visible. Birth control pills received the same treatment, along with a vibrator I'd hidden in a drawer beneath winter sweaters. Throughout their search, they planted religious pamphlets in strategic locations. Inside my medicine cabinet, between couch cushions, in my underwear drawer, even inside my laptop bag. The pamphlets had titles like, Honor Thy Father and Mother, A Child's Eternal Obligation, and The Dangers of Independence, Why God Wants Families Together. They were careful to place them where I'd find them during normal daily activities, ensuring a constant stream of guilt-inducing reminders. My mother even left sticky notes on my mirror with Bible verses about obedience and the consequences of rebellion. Their conversation while violating my privacy revealed even darker plans. As my mother flipped through my planner, she mentioned a private investigator they were considering hiring. They wanted someone to follow me during work hours, document who I met with, where I ate lunch, and whether I was really where I claimed to be. My father suggested the investigator could also look into my coworkers and any new friends I'd made, running background checks to ensure I wasn't associating with unsavory characters. The cost would be substantial, but they agreed I was worth the investment. After all, as my mother put it, saving my soul was priceless. The medication investigation was particularly thorough. They photographed every prescription bottle, researching each medication on their phones. My anxiety medication became evidence of mental instability. Birth control was proof of sexual deviance. Even my allergy medication was suspicious, with my father wondering aloud if I was using it to make drugs. They created a detailed inventory, noting dosages and refill dates. My mother suggested contacting my doctors directly, perhaps posing as concerned family members to gather more information about my medical history. The violation of my medical privacy felt almost physical, like hands reaching inside my body without permission. The most disturbing revelation came near the end of their visit. My mother, while reorganizing my bookshelf to her liking, casually mentioned that my recent sleeping patterns had changed. She noted that I'd been tossing and turning more, sometimes crying out in my sleep. My father agreed, adding that I seemed to be having nightmares more frequently. The realization hit me like ice water. They'd been entering my apartment while I slept, standing in my bedroom, watching me in my most vulnerable state. How many nights had I been unconscious while they stood over my bed, invading not just my privacy but my very dreams? Vernon's role in this violation became clearer as I watched him interact with my parents. He wasn't just providing access, he was an active participant. He suggested times when I was guaranteed to be out, shared information about my visitors, and even offered to install a camera in the hallway to monitor my movements. My parents paid him $200 cash for each visit, but it seemed the money was secondary to his enjoyment of the conspiracy. He spoke about other tenants with similar situations, apparently running a side business in parental surveillance. His casual mention of duplicate keys he'd made for other concerned parents made me wonder how many people in my building were living under similar invasions. As they prepared to leave, my mother made one final chilling comment. She suggested that maybe it was time to consider more drastic measures for my own good. The way she said it, with a mix of false concern and cold determination, made her meaning clear. They'd been researching involuntary commitment procedures, ways to have me institutionalized based on their manufactured evidence of instability. My father agreed, noting that a short stay in a facility might reset my rebellious tendencies and remind me of the importance of family. They discussed which doctors might be sympathetic to their cause, which facilities had the best reputation for handling difficult cases. My freedom, my autonomy, my very identity as an adult were under threat, and they discussed it as casually as planning a vacation. The video evidence of my parents' nighttime invasions and their discussion of forced institutionalization sparked a primal survival instinct in me. I couldn't simply change locks again, or file complaints that would go nowhere. I needed to disappear completely, to vanish from their radar, while setting a trap they'd walk into willingly. The plan that formed in my mind was complex and required absolute secrecy. One leak, one suspicious move, and they'd escalate to their nuclear option of having me committed. My coworker Garrett proved invaluable in the early stages of my escape plan. His cousin Maya managed a small apartment complex on the other side of the city, a nondescript building that didn't advertise online and relied on word-of-mouth tenants. It was perfect for someone who needed to disappear. Maya, after hearing a condensed version of my situation, offered me a unit on the third floor with enhanced security features, including a doorbell camera, motion sensors, and a deadbolt that couldn't be picked or bumped. The lease would be in her company's name with me as an unlisted occupant, keeping my name off any searchable records. The logistics of secretly moving while maintaining the appearance of normal life required military precision. I rented a storage unit using cash, slowly moving non-essential items during lunch breaks and early mornings. Each trip had to look natural, like I was donating old clothes or taking things to dry cleaning. I packed strategically, choosing items that wouldn't be immediately noticed if missing. Photo albums went first, followed by important documents, jewelry, and sentimental items. Larger furniture would have to wait until the final phase, but I could survive without it temporarily. Maintaining my routine became a critical performance. I continued shopping at the same grocery store, leaving at the same time each morning, returning at predictable hours. My social media posts showed me at home, watching TV shows I'd actually watched weeks ago, cooking meals in my familiar kitchen. I took photos during different times of day to post later, creating a digital alibi that would satisfy any casual surveillance. Friends who didn't need to know received the same fabricated updates, protecting them from accidentally revealing anything to the wrong person. The process of setting up my new apartment happened in careful stages. I purchased duplicate items of things I use daily, from coffee makers to towels, paying cash at different stores across the city. Each shopping trip followed a circuitous route, doubling back and taking unnecessary detours in case I was being followed. I activated new utilities using a variation of my name and a new phone number purchased specifically for the apartment. Every bill would be paperless, every communication digital and password protected with two-factor authentication my parents couldn't bypass. My friend Serena became my only confidant and crucial ally in the deception. A fellow survivor of family abuse, she understood the stakes without needing extensive explanation. She helped me move items to the storage unit, drove me to furniture stores in neighboring towns, and even let me use her address for certain deliveries. We developed a code system for communication, innocuous messages that conveyed real meaning. Coffee Tuesday meant she'd pick me up for a moving run. Thinking of you signaled an emergency abort if something seemed suspicious. The legal preparation happened simultaneously with the physical move. My friend Jasper, a tenant rights lawyer, reviewed my lease and helped me understand the implications of abandonment versus proper notice. He drafted cease and desist letters I could send if needed and prepared documentation for a restraining order that remained unfiled but ready. He also educated me on the evidence needed for various charges: breaking and entering, stalking, harassment, and theft of mail. Every video, every photograph, every documented incident went into a comprehensive file stored in multiple secure cloud locations. The security system I installed in my old apartment became my early warning system and evidence collector. Multiple cameras covered every angle, uploading continuously to cloud storage with redundant backups. Motion sensors would alert my phone instantly, allowing me to monitor their invasions in real time. I programmed the system to look inactive, keeping indicator lights off, and hiding the cameras more carefully than my parents had hidden theirs. They needed to believe they were undetected for my plan to work. Creating believable reasons for my absence required creative storytelling. I crafted a fictional boyfriend named David who lived 2 hours away, gradually mentioning him to neighbors, and letting the information naturally flow to my parents. I posted about weekend trips to visit him, using photos from previous vacations cropped and filtered to look current. This fictional relationship served multiple purposes, explaining my frequent absences, the decrease in mail and deliveries, and why my car might be gone for extended periods. I even had Serena call me while neighbors were nearby, speaking loudly enough about David to ensure the gossip spread. The staged apartment became a masterpiece of deception. I left enough furniture and personal items to make it look lived in, but removed anything of real value or deep personal significance. Thrift store finds replaced valuable electronics. Printed photos replaced originals. I even left a fake diary with entries about David and my supposed struggle with whether to move in with him. Every detail was crafted to waste their time and misdirect their efforts when they inevitably searched for clues about my whereabouts. Old magazines were dated and placed strategically. Empty food containers in the trash suggested recent meals, and I set timers on lights and electronics to simulate presence. The financial aspects required careful handling to avoid leaving a trail. I opened new bank accounts at different institutions, gradually transferring funds in small amounts that wouldn't trigger suspicion. Credit cards were paid off and frozen rather than closed, maintaining the appearance of normal financial activity. I changed my direct deposit to split between accounts, keeping enough in the old account to cover automatic bills that might raise red flags if suddenly stopped. Every financial move was calculated to delay discovery while protecting my assets from any attempted parental intervention. The hardest part was resisting the urge to confront them with what I knew. Every time they called with fake concern, every manipulative text, every flying monkey they sent to check on me tested my resolve. But I held firm, playing the role of the oblivious daughter struggling with life decisions. I complained about work stress to give them something to focus on. I mentioned feeling tired to explain any changes they might notice in my demeanor. Every conversation was a performance, and every successful deception brought me closer to freedom. 2 weeks before my final exit, I began the last phase of preparation. I hired professional movers for a single early morning job, scheduling them to arrive at 4 a.m. when surveillance would be minimal. Everything would go to the new apartment in one swift operation. I prepared letters for afterward, explaining to select neighbors and my employer that I'd relocated for personal reasons, providing my new contact information only to those I trusted completely. For everyone else, I would simply vanish, becoming another young professional who moved on to new opportunities. The morning of my final departure felt like a military operation launching at dawn. The movers arrived precisely at 4 a.m., working with the efficiency of a pit crew. Within 2 hours, everything I truly owned was loaded and transported to my new life across the city. I left behind the staged apartment, a hollow shell designed to waste my parents' time, and ultimately expose their crimes. The cameras kept rolling, the timers kept switching, and the trap was set. All that remained was to wait for them to walk into it. My first night in the new apartment felt surreal. For the first time in years, I knew with absolute certainty that no one would enter while I slept. No one would read my diary, judge my belongings, or stand over my bed monitoring my dreams. The freedom was intoxicating but also unsettling. I'd grown so accustomed to invasion that privacy felt foreign. I double-checked the locks repeatedly, tested the security system, and still barely slept, but this time from excitement rather than fear. The alert came at midnight 3 days later. My phone buzzed with a notification from the old apartment's security system. Motion detected at the front door. I opened the app and watched in real time as my parents entered with Vernon, moving with their usual casual confidence. This time, though, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment felt different, emptier, though they couldn't immediately identify why. My mother went straight to the bedroom while my father began checking the kitchen. Their confusion was palpable as they found spaces where belongings should be. Furniture that looked similar but wrong. Their search intensified as panic began to set in. My mother discovered the fake diary and began reading frantically, looking for clues. Her face went through a range of emotions as she read about David and my supposed plans to move in with him. She called out to my father, who abandoned his search to join her. They huddled over the diary, analyzing every entry, trying to determine if this David was real and where he might live. Vernon, meanwhile, was checking closets and cupboards, his experienced eye recognizing that something was definitely amiss. The moment they realized I was truly gone was captured in perfect detail by my cameras. My father opened what should have been a full closet to find only a few old clothes on hangers. My mother checked the bathroom and found basic toiletries, but none of my usual products. The reality hit them simultaneously, and their reaction was immediate and extreme. My mother began hyperventilating, screaming that I'd been kidnapped, that something terrible must have happened. My father's response was pure rage, kicking furniture and punching walls, leaving visible damage to the apartment. Their decision to call the police sealed their fate. My mother, in full hysteria, dialed 911 claiming her daughter was missing and in danger. She fabricated details on the spot, telling the dispatcher that I'd been depressed, that I'd mentioned suicide, that I might have been coerced by a dangerous boyfriend. My father grabbed the phone, adding that they had reason to believe I'd been trafficked. That time was of the essence. Vernon, realizing the situation was spiraling beyond his comfort zone, tried to quietly exit, but my father ordered him to stay as a witness. The police arrived within 15 minutes, expecting to find a crime scene or evidence of foul play. Instead, they found 3 people in an apartment that clearly wasn't theirs, with visible damage my father had just caused. Officer Rodriguez, a veteran cop with little patience for dramatics, immediately began asking pointed questions. Who lived here? How did they gain entry? Where was there evidence of a crime? My parents, still in panic mode, couldn't provide coherent answers. They claimed parental rights, insisted they were saving my life, and demanded the police issue an immediate Amber Alert. Vernon's attempt to help only made things worse. He admitted to being the building manager and giving them access, but when pressed about authorization, he fumbled. Officer Rodriguez asked to see written permission from the tenant for entry, and Vernon couldn't provide it. He tried to explain about the emergency exception, but when questioned about the specific emergency, the story fell apart. My parents hadn't claimed a medical emergency this time, and their story about trafficking and suicide made no sense given they'd used a key to enter calmly at midnight. The situation escalated when my father, frustrated by the questioning, made the mistake of threatening legal action. He claimed to know the police chief, said Officer Rodriguez would lose his job, and demanded to speak to a supervisor immediately. His aggressive posturing triggered a shift in the officer's approach. What had started as a welfare check was now looking like breaking and entering with a side of attempted fraud for the false emergency call. When my mother tried to show them the fake diary as evidence, she inadvertently admitted to taking it from the apartment, adding theft to their potential charges. Officer Rodriguez's partner, Officer Kim, noticed the damage to the walls and furniture. Fresh holes in the drywall, a broken chair, items clearly thrown in anger. When asked about it, my parents couldn't deny it had just happened. Property damage was added to the growing list of crimes. Vernon tried to distance himself at this point, claiming he thought he was helping with a legitimate family emergency, but his admission of accepting payment for access undermined any innocent intentions. The cash payments looked like bribes, and his repeated violations of tenant privacy were criminal. The arrival of a detective shifted the investigation into high gear. Detective Morrison specialized in stalking and harassment cases, and she recognized the patterns immediately. She asked about previous entries, and my parents, still believing they were justified, admitted to entering regularly for months. They showed photos on their phones taken inside the apartment, date-stamped evidence of serial criminal trespass. When they mentioned the private investigator they'd considered hiring, Detective Morrison's expression hardened. This wasn't concerned parents. This was systematic stalking. My mother's complete breakdown happened when she realized they were being arrested. She fell to her knees, wailing about being a loving mother, about saving her daughter from damnation. She grabbed Officer Rodriguez's leg, begging him to understand that she was protecting me. Her hysteria escalated to the point where EMTs were called to evaluate her. My father's rage turned cold and calculating. He demanded lawyers, made veiled threats about lawsuits and careers being ruined, and insisted this was all a misunderstanding that his connections would sort out quickly. Vernon's arrest was quieter, but no less significant. As the building manager, his violations weren't just criminal but also broke numerous civil codes. Every tenant he'd given unauthorized access to could now sue him, and the building company. His side business of selling access to worried parents had created liability that would likely bankrupt him. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept muttering about just trying to help families stay together, unable to comprehend how his actions were criminal rather than charitable. The neighbor who filmed the arrests, a young journalism student named Katie, captured my mother's meltdown in vivid detail. Within hours, the video was online with the caption, "Helicopter parents get arrested breaking into adult daughter's apartment." The video showed my mother screaming about Satan stealing her baby, my father threatening to destroy everyone involved, and Vernon looking confused and defeated. The public reaction was swift and decisive, with thousands of comments supporting the unknown daughter, who'd escaped such obvious abuse. The video would eventually go viral, becoming a cautionary tale about parental boundaries. The avalanche of consequences that followed my parents' arrest was both validating and overwhelming. Detective Morrison contacted me the morning after, having found my information through the lease agreement. She was professional but warm, assuring me that the evidence was overwhelming and charges would definitely be filed. The list was extensive: breaking and entering, criminal trespass, theft, property damage, filing a false police report, harassment and stalking. Vernon faced additional charges related to accepting bribes and violating his fiduciary duty as property manager. The detective also informed me about my rights as a victim and the resources available for support. The legal machinery moved with surprising speed. The district attorney's office, recognizing the clear-cut nature of the evidence and the public attention from the viral video, decided to prosecute aggressively. My parents hired an expensive defense attorney, Richard Steinberg, known for getting wealthy clients out of trouble. But even he struggled with the mountain of evidence they'd created themselves. The photos they'd taken inside my apartment, their own admissions to police, the damage they'd caused, and months of security footage made any defense challenging. Their initial strategy of claiming parental concern fell apart when prosecutors presented evidence of the hidden cameras and plans for forced institutionalization. Vernon's situation rapidly deteriorated as more tenants came forward. Apparently, my parents weren't his only clients in the parental surveillance business. 3 other young adults in the building discovered their parents had been given unauthorized access. One, a medical student named James, had been subjected to similar invasions that nearly cost him his residency when his parents contacted his supervisors with concerns. The building management company, facing massive liability, immediately fired Vernon and began cooperating with authorities to minimize their own culpability. They offered all affected tenants free lease termination and moving expenses, hoping to avoid lawsuits. The family fallout was swift and divisive. Aunt Ruth, who had called me in tears about my supposed addictions, was horrified to learn the truth. She'd been shown carefully edited photos and fabricated evidence, never questioning why my parents had such intimate access to my life. She called to apologize profusely, admitting she should have spoken to me directly instead of believing their narrative. But not all family members were as understanding. Some, particularly my parents' siblings, rallied to their defense. Uncle Robert started a family group chat dedicated to supporting my parents through their persecution, as he called it. Cousins I'd grown up with chose sides, some blocking me on social media while others reached out with their own stories of my parents' controlling behavior they'd witnessed over the years. The church community that had been my parents' social foundation splintered over the scandal. Many members were scandalized by the arrests and the behavior revealed in the viral video. The prayer group that had met in my apartment without permission faced their own reckoning, realizing they'd been unwitting accomplices to criminal behavior. Pastor Williams attempted to remain neutral, but eventually had to ask my parents to take a leave of absence from their leadership roles when their legal troubles began affecting church attendance. Some congregants started a prayer chain for my parents, while others quietly admitted they'd always found their interest in controlling me disturbing. My workplace transformation was remarkable. Denise called me personally to apologize, admitting she'd been manipulated by my parents' convincing performance. The company conducted a review of their security procedures, implementing new policies about verifying family member claims and protecting employee privacy. My colleagues who had been poisoned against me gradually warmed up again, many apologizing for believing the lies. Garrett became an even stronger ally, using his influence to ensure I was considered for the promotion I'd missed. Within 2 months, I not only got that promotion but was also asked to lead a new team focused on digital security and privacy, ironically making my personal experience professionally valuable. Brandon's attempt to reconnect was perhaps the most pathetic consequence. He sent flowers to my office with a note claiming he'd always believed in me, but felt overwhelmed. His texts escalated from apologetic to demanding, insisting I owed him a chance to explain. When I maintained silence, he showed up at my old apartment building, only to discover from new tenants that I no longer lived there. He then tried contacting my friends, looking for information about my whereabouts. Serena took particular pleasure in telling him off, pointing out that someone who abandoned me at my lowest point had no right to claim space in my recovery. His final attempt involved creating a public Instagram post about losing the love of his life to misunderstandings, which was widely mocked by mutual acquaintances who knew the truth. The media attention intensified as the case progressed. Local news picked up the story, especially after learning about Vernon's broader operation. Building manager ran secret surveillance ring for helicopter parents became a headline that sparked discussions about privacy rights and adult autonomy. My parents' mugshots appeared in articles about toxic parenting and boundary violations. Legal experts weighed in on talk shows about the rise in parental stalking cases. I declined all interview requests, letting the evidence speak for itself, but the public attention meant my parents couldn't quietly make this disappear with their connections. The prosecution offered my parents a plea deal. Plead guilty to reduced charges, accept 2 years of probation, mandatory therapy, and a permanent restraining order. Their attorney recommended taking it, warning that a trial could result in actual jail time given the evidence and public sentiment. My father initially refused, insisting on his day in court to explain his actions. But when the prosecutor added that a trial would mean playing all the security footage publicly, including their mockery of my diary and discussions of institutionalization, my mother convinced him to reconsider. The thought of their private conversations becoming public record was more than their pride could bear. Vernon took his own plea deal, accepting 3 years probation and lifetime ban from property management. The financial consequences for him were severe. Not only did he lose his job and industry credentials, but the civil lawsuits from affected tenants drained his retirement savings. His wife filed for divorce, citing the humiliation and financial ruin he'd brought upon their family. His adult children publicly disowned him, with his daughter posting a statement about the irony of a man who violated young adults' privacy in the name of parental rights losing his own children's respect forever. The extended family drama continued for months. Holiday gatherings became battlegrounds between those who supported my decision and those who believed family loyalty should supersede everything. My grandmother, whom I'd always loved dearly, sent a letter expressing her disappointment in my choice to involve law enforcement. She wrote about family matters staying private, about forgiveness being divine, about honoring thy father and mother regardless of their actions. It broke my heart, but I recognized the generational trauma that normalized such invasive behavior. Other relatives surprised me with support, including cousins who shared their own stories of my parents' inappropriate interest in their lives over the years. 6 months after that midnight confrontation in my empty apartment, I finally felt like I could breathe freely. My new home had become a genuine sanctuary, a place where every item stayed exactly where I left it, where my thoughts remained private, and where sleep came peacefully without fear of invasion. The restraining order had been approved, giving me legal protection for 2 years with the possibility of extension. My parents had completed their mandated therapy sessions, though I doubted any real change had occurred. People that deepen their patterns rarely transform just because a court orders it. My growth during this period surprised even me. I joined a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents, initially skeptical but eventually finding profound healing in shared experiences. The group leader, Monica, had her own story of escaping parental control that made mine seem mild by comparison. Through weekly meetings, I learned to recognize patterns I'd normalized, manipulation tactics I'd accepted as love, and boundaries I'd never known I deserved. The vocabulary alone was transformative. Words like enmeshment, infantilization, and covert incest gave names to experiences I'd never been able to articulate. Understanding that my parents' behavior had a clinical framework helped me stop blaming myself for their choices. The support group also became a place where I could help others. New members would arrive, confused and guilty about their anger toward their parents, and I could offer them what I'd needed most: validation that their feelings were justified. One young man, Terry, reminded me of myself 2 years ago, making excuses for parents who tracked his every move through his phone. Watching him slowly realize that love doesn't require surveillance was like witnessing my own journey from an outside perspective. When he finally changed his phone number and moved without telling them, the group celebrated his freedom like a graduation. Professionally, My life flourished without the constant sabotage. The promotion I'd received came with responsibilities I embraced enthusiastically. Leading the digital security team allowed me to channel my personal experiences into protecting others' privacy. We developed new protocols that specifically address family-related security breaches, acknowledging that sometimes the greatest threats come from those who claim to love us most. My presentation at the annual security conference about insider threats in family businesses was standing room only, with many attendees privately thanking me for addressing an often ignored vulnerability. My personal life also experienced a renaissance. Without my parents' constant interference and character assassination, I could form genuine connections. My friendship with Serena deepened into the sister relationship I'd never had. We started a tradition of Sunday brunches where we'd celebrate our freedom from toxic families with mimosas and increasingly elaborate egg dishes. Through the support group, I met others who understood why certain holidays were hard, why Mother's Day cards made us uncomfortable, why we sometimes cried with relief at the simple act of locking our own doors. James entered my life not through drama or grand gestures, but through the quiet consistency of respect. We met at a bookstore, both reaching for the same copy of a book about setting boundaries. His laugh when we realized the irony broke through my defensive walls just a little. He was a teacher, patient and understanding, with his own history of family complications that made him comprehend why I needed to take things slowly. Our first dates were in public places where I felt safe. He never pushed for my address, never questioned my security measures, never made me feel paranoid for checking that my door was locked multiple times. When I finally invited him to my apartment 3 months later, he understood the magnitude of that trust. The conversation with my parents' lawyer came 18 months after their arrest. They wanted to attempt reconciliation, claiming the therapy had given them new perspective. The lawyer presented it as a reasonable request from parents who'd learned their lesson. I declined without hesitation, explaining that reconciliation required more than court-mandated therapy sessions. It needed genuine acknowledgement of harm, which they'd never provided. Their version of taking responsibility still included phrases like, "We love too much," and "We only wanted what was best." Until they could acknowledge that breaking into my home, planning my institutionalization, and destroying my relationships was abuse, not love, we had nothing to discuss. My work with the domestic violence shelter began as community service for my own healing, but evolved into a passion. Many people don't recognize that stalking and surveillance can happen within families, that parents can be perpetrators of abuse that leaves no visible bruises, but profound psychological scars. I started leading workshops on recognizing covert abuse, helping others identify when family loyalty has become toxic bondage. The stories I heard reinforced that my experience, while severe, wasn't unique. Parents putting tracking devices on adult children's cars, showing up at their workplaces, accessing their medical records, sabotaging their relationships, all justified as parental love. The speaking engagements at conferences happened organically. My viral video had made me accidentally famous in certain circles, and organizations working on stalking awareness wanted to hear from someone who'd successfully escaped and prosecuted family stalkers. I always spoke anonymously, maintaining the privacy I'd fought so hard to achieve. But my message resonated. Family doesn't grant ownership of your life, DNA isn't a deed to your autonomy, and love that requires surveillance isn't love at all. The questions afterward always broke my heart. So many people trapped in similar situations, convinced they were overreacting, that they owed their parents unlimited access to their lives. Volunteering taught me that healing isn't linear. Some days, I'd see a mother and daughter shopping together, and feel a stab of grief for the healthy relationship I'd never had. Other times, I'd realize weeks had passed without thinking about my parents at all. The nightmares faded gradually, replaced by dreams of flying, of doors that locked, of spaces that stayed exactly as I left them. My hypervigilance decreased too. I stopped checking my rearview mirror obsessively, stopped freezing when someone knocked on my door, stopped assuming every unknown number was them trying to reach me through someone else's phone. The deepest healing came from building my chosen family. Serena, Maya, Garrett, Monica from group, James, and others who'd proven their respect for my boundaries became the family I'd always deserved. We celebrated holidays together, creating new traditions free from obligation or guilt. Our gatherings were loud and messy and full of genuine affection that never felt like surveillance. No one went through anyone's belongings, read private messages, or demanded detailed accounts of our lives. We loved each other enough to respect each other's autonomy, understanding that healthy love creates space for individuality. The lesson I carry forward is deceptively simple, but profound in its implications. Family isn't entitled to destroy your peace. The accident of birth doesn't grant unlimited access to your life, your thoughts, your dreams, or your home. Love that requires constant surveillance isn't love but possession. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who claim to love you while systematically violating your boundaries. The guilt they'll try to instill is their weapon, not your truth. You deserve relationships based on respect, not ownership. You deserve privacy, autonomy, and the basic human right to lock your door knowing it will stay locked. I changed my phone number one final time, deleted old email accounts, and closed social media profiles that connected to my past. Not from fear anymore, but from the peaceful certainty that I owed them nothing, not even the possibility of contact. The restraining order would expire eventually, but the boundaries I'd built would last forever. Some bridges deserve to be burned, and sometimes the most profound freedom comes from standing in the light of those flames, warming yourself with the heat of your own liberation. The lock on my door now keeps danger out, not love. And for the first time in my life, I sleep through the night without fear. When people ask if I regret involving the police, if I couldn't have handled it differently, I tell them the truth. My only regret is not doing it sooner. Some lessons come at too high a price, but this one was worth every moment of struggle. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from family. Especially from family. And anyone who tells you otherwise is probably someone you need protection from. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set extreme boundaries with family members who wouldn't respect your privacy? How did you find the strength to prioritize your own well-being over family expectations? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember, your experiences might help someone else recognize that they deserve better. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and reclaiming your life from those who refuse to respect your autonomy. Consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that family doesn't equal ownership. Together, we can break the cycle of normalized abuse and create a community where chosen family means more than forced connections. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you deserve relationships that honor your independence, not ones that seek to destroy it.